We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. We have two very interesting guests today on Point of View. One of them, we will speak with Ambassador Hank Cooper about missile defense. You know that President Trump talked during the campaign and has talked a little bit since he's been elected and taken office about an Iron Dome. Israel has an Iron Dome that very famously has kept its citizens safe in the face of terrorist bombs coming in from Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. And President Bush, and of course, we helped them get that Iron Dome, provided some of the technology. And President Trump would like to have that for us. Now, it would be a lot bigger, and it has the name has changed. They're calling it now a Golden Dome. Doesn't that remind you of some of the language that President Trump would probably employ? Is this a feasible thing for America to do? It sounds awfully expensive to protect an entire country with something like that. But my guest, Ambassador Hank Cooper, who was director of the Strategic Defense Initiative under President George H.W. Bush, he helped develop that strategic defense capability in the Reagan administration, and he was also the part of negotiations on arms control with President Reagan. So he has a lot of experience. He knows wherein he speaks. I have spoken to him, and he's excited to come onto the program and speak about these things. He says that it's actually very affordable to do something like this, and that we have a great opportunity to do it under President Trump. So we will really enjoy that interview. That'll be in the second hour of the program. Also, Donna Hughes is going to join me. She is CEO and president of Enough is Enough, and she has dedicated her life and career to internet safety, especially for children. There's so many parts of that, and so we're going to spend some time talking with Donna Hughes just in a few minutes. But I did want to, I don't know if Kirby has talked about this. My guess is that he has talked about it, but maybe I'll talk about it a little bit more. But last week, about a week ago on Tuesday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case. It's not one of First Liberty's cases, so we won't be talking about it on Friday when I'm in here hosting again. But it's actually been, it was taken to the Supreme Court by the Becket Fund. It is a religious liberty case, but in my opinion, it's also a parental rights case. And I think that's what makes it very, very important. It's called Mahmoud versus Taylor. Mahmoud versus Taylor. Families of faith, led by a Muslim family, but also Jewish families and Christian families, are fighting to keep their children from having imposed upon them the learning of gender ideology in their school. And it's the Board of Education in Montgomery County, Maryland, that is actually imposing this upon its school district. It's the largest school district in the state of Maryland. And so this Board of Education is requiring a curriculum for pre-K through fourth grade kids. And I mean, this stuff is not anything children that age even need to be thinking about or talking about, but that's it. That's where they are. That's where we are in other places in the country. This was a great case, though, to send to the U.S. Supreme Court. It involves 20 LGBTQ books about gender ideology. They're not just on the shelves in the classroom. They're required to be read. The curriculum is about inclusive storybooks. That's what the proponents are saying. And these books, 20 of them, as I said, are part of their curriculum. And they say things like, not everyone is a boy or a girl. Or They champion pride parades. They champion gender transitioning and pronoun preferences. Of course, all staples of gender ideology. They tell children to celebrate same-sex relationships and same-sex marriages. They tell them that they can switch genders and even alter their bodies to do so, but that they can also be the gender opposite from the one that they were born. And they just talk about what they believe is the fluidity of genders. They don't use that word, though. It's a little bit of a hard word for fourth graders, don't you think? Parents are simply asking in that district not to remove the curriculum from the district. No. They're not asking for that. They're asking to be able to pull their children out of these lessons. They're asking to be informed when the lessons are taught. And they're taught as a reading lesson, as sort of English reading, not health or anything like that. So it's just something that you need to be reading, and you're required to read. The parents, though, are not allowed. They were at one time allowed to pull these kids out of the curriculum, but they're not anymore. They said it would be the officials said it would be too cumbersome to handle opting them out, which tells you something, that they probably had a lot of requests for opt-outs. The Montgomery County School Board rejected that request from the parents. It's gone up through the court system, and it was heard last Tuesday by the U.S. Supreme Court. And, boy, there is so much that was said in that courtroom. I was proud of many of the justices, especially Justice Roberts, Justice Alito, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch. They all asked really good questions and made some really good points. And the oral arguments, when they took place, observers said that it looked really good for the parents. But I think that the thing to wish for or hope for or pray for, first we can pray for that their religious liberty would be respected. It's a religious liberty case, but it's more than that. And this is what I'm hoping, that it is not decided just on religious liberty grounds, but also on parental rights grounds. Parents absolutely have a right to decide whether or not their children are exposed to this kind of material. And I think this applies to all children, but it certainly applies to little kids this age, where there was one argument that was made by one of the parties that said that you could ignore it, that you don't have to accept these ideas just because you hear them, which, that may be true for somebody in college, but it's not true for a 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, which that's the ages of these kids. And there's a lot in the curriculum that you can read if you want to read about it. We've posted an article about it out of National Review at pointofview.net. It's very coercive. If someone objects, they are, there's some pushback throughout the curriculum to try to push it on kids, and that's what it is. It's an indoctrination of children, and parents absolutely always, always, always have the right to control that kind of indoctrination. And so if the Supreme Court makes a strong opinion and there's just some good points made that also protect parental rights, that would be a real victory for parents across the United States of America. Well, next up, we'll continue this conversation with Donna Rice Hughes and talk a lot about internet safety. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A new book by David Zweig, An Abundance of Caution, confirms what many of us knew as we tried to navigate the government mandates during the pandemic and lockdowns. Some have referred to him as a data-minded journalist, author, and cultural commentator who isn't all that political, but has been challenging the authoritarian restrictions we all tried to endure 5 years ago. The 464-page, 1.5-pound book may be more than you might want to read, so you might want to dip into an excerpt published in The Atlantic. The premise is easy to understand. We made a huge mistake with the school shutdowns. As early as February 2020, we knew that children were never a significant transmitter of the virus and also knew that the virus posed little danger to them. Here is his explanation. He says without sufficient acknowledgement of the harms of school closures or adequate planning for unwinding this intervention, officials showed that their decisions to close were simply reactive rather than carefully considered. The decision makers set a radical project in motion with no plan on how to stop it. In effect, officials steered the car off the road, threw a cinder block on the accelerator, then jumped out of the vehicle with passengers still in the back. No one was in front or even knew how to unstick the pedal. In his post on X, he argues that the book is not about the pandemic, it's about the failure of the expert class. It turns out that the expert class isn't so expert after all. Teachers' unions promoted hysteria about the alleged dangers of opening schools. Health officials and school boards rarely challenged the push for school closing. And his book is a cautionary tale about what happens when we believe so-called experts and ignore relevant data. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Very excited about my guest in this hour, and her name is Donna Rice Hughes. She is CEO and president of an organization that's been around a while called Enough is Enough. And, you know, this organization started out fighting pornography. And, of course, technology has caused that pornography issue and given us like 5 or 6 more issues that we have to deal with, having to do with the safety of young people and children online. And so Enough is Enough has been wise enough to evolve with the times and with the technology. And Donna, I'm so happy to have you on Point of View today to talk about all these things. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Penna. It is so good to be with you, and I hope you and your listeners can hear me. We're actually on I-95 driving, so we're doing a little multitasking right now. But fortunately, I'm not driving. I'm just in the passenger seat.
Well, I'm glad you're not driving. It sounds fine. It doesn't sound like you're driving.
Oh, good.
And I want to mention to our listeners that you have 30 years leading I don't know if it's this organization, but leading in this field as a social entrepreneur, an internet safety expert, author, speaker, and media commentator. And I noticed you have a podcast, and there are so many issues, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of fall under the rubric of internet safety that I think that your podcast, you probably have just tons of different topics to address on that podcast. So I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you, Penna. We just started that last year, and so yeah, it's going great. And as you said, when we began, our focus in 1992, I wasn't with the group then. They were focused on protecting children and families from pornography and child pornography and sexually oriented business. This is pre-internet, enter 1994, which is when I started. That was at the very beginning of the internet being introduced, basically, in the United States.
Yes.
And that's when we saw the beginning of what is now a complete pandemic and disaster. And that was the fact that hardcore pornography, child pornography, sexual predators and pedophiles were using the pre-internet. This was before email. This was before the World Wide Web. It was under development at the time at MIT. Even became, commercialized. So that's how we got involved. So I had the opportunity to help pioneer and lead the internet safety movement beginning in 1994-95. We were the first nonprofit to deal with this issue. And here we are over 30 years later. And I wish I could say that we've had a tremendous amount of success. But the problem is, Penna, is that we're fighting multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprises, whether it's online porn, online child exploitation, trafficking, that it's just all kind of gone everywhere. Pandora's box has been opened. You've got sexting, you've got sextortion now. It's just the whole ball of wax. And so any area of danger that a child can get into online, our focus is preventing that. And fortunately, what began with one nonprofit and a partner of ours, actually, we were joint office, now we have hundreds and hundreds of groups fighting to make the internet safe. And I'm happy to say that I believe that the tide is starting to turn. I really do, because people have just said enough is enough. Parents are recognizing that their kids are not immune. Kids are online. The majority of them are online at a very early age through some type of internet-connected device. And so, we've got to address this as the war that it is. And I'm so grateful to be on your show.
Well, it is a war, and I did notice on your website, and of course, I think parents, you say the tide's turning. I think it's because parents are aware that the fact that kids are online, on screens, I mean, your stat is 8.5 hours on average per day, and this is not school related. This is just online. That's where their lives are spent now. And so, and sometimes it's just bad anyway. It's not very healthy to be like that. And there are all sorts of social problems you can have. But the problems of the predators who have access to them with all these hours that they're spending online, how do, what are some of the ways that that's being dealt with?
Yeah, well, I tell you, it's, when you have a pandemic type problem like this, you need to have strategies and more of a holistic solution, if you will. So what we've done, and this has actually been modeled even by government, but our focus has been educating, equipping, and empowering the public, starting with parents, because parents have got to recognize that their kids are not immune, first of all, and they have to be equipped with the information and the tools they need to do their part to be the first line of defense. The second piece of this is the role of corporate responsibility in big tech, which is a big, heavy lift, because quite honestly, there was a report, let me just see if I can get my numbers for you, $90 million just came out in a Harvard study a couple of years ago that the big tech companies spent over $90 million lobbying against the bipartisan legislation that we're trying to get passed to actually hold these companies more accountable and responsible to do their part to protect kids online and to put safety over profit. Then, of course, you've got the role of government and law enforcement. So that's twofold, if you will. We need to get our current laws, and we've got a lot of laws on the books, but they're not all aggressively enforced or even funded. So, for instance, the hardcore pornography laws, which fall under federal obscenity laws, they haven't even been enforced since George W. Bush was president,
wow.
which is just ridiculous, right? And so I'm not talking about yesterday's, your father's pornography of 40, 50 years ago. I mean, this is hardcore material where typically women are being punched, choked, violated, teen rape kinds of things are in this material. It's very, very violent, and it's not even protected for adults, and yet kids have free and easy access to it. And then, of course, you've got, the getting new policy. So when I said the tide's starting to turn, we've had a bipartisan Congress, especially in the United States Senate, that has passed out of their committees for the past 3 years unanimously bipartisan legislation. However, until this year, when Senator Schumer, before he was booted out, I'm just going to be blunt about it,
lost his majority position.
He lost his position, and thank God for that, because at least with respect to this type of legislation, he was holding up floor votes.
Wow.
That was being supported by his own party. So you've got a lot going on here. But like I said, the good news now legislation is starting to move. We just had a piece of legislation passed. It's on its way to the president's desk now.
What's that piece of legislation?
Yes, it's called Take It Down. And so this was introduced by Senator Cruz, and it was bipartisan. And this actually is dealing with deep fake images, not just of kids, but of adults. So that's
which you can do via AI.
Yeah, so that's AI generated. And so this can impact anyone, a child or an adult. And so this actually requires, when this comes to the attention of a website or a platform or service like a social media app, then they've got a short amount of time to take it down, right? So this is good. I mean, we're all.
So
on
what
board
happens
with
if they don't take it down? So this is the internet companies. They need to take it down. Somebody has created an image of a person they know that is not real, but it's very embarrassing and can devastate young kids. I noticed that Melania Trump calls this bullying, cyberbullying, and she supported this act, didn't she?
Yes, she did. And it is a form of bullying, if you will. In fact, here's an interesting point. I was doing another interview recently, and this kids themselves are creating deep fakes as another form of bullying, to bully someone that they don't like. So this isn't just sex traffickers and pornographers and just the bad guys doing it. You know, people are just doing it to one another, including kids. So this kind of comes back to there's a plethora of problems. Kids are online, like you said, an enormous amount of time. You've got the dangers of, all the dangers I mentioned, plus screen time. And another area.
Yeah, let me jump in on that, because I do want to talk about screen time. I noticed on your website that it said that some kids realize that they're on screens too much, but it's kind of like, people trying to go on a diet. It's hard to figure out how to really do it. So we are so blessed to be able to speak with Donna Rice Hughes today about her organization, Enough is Enough, and all their good work. Stick with us for more of Point of View. We'll be right back.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And my guest is Donna Rice Hughes, and for over 30 years, she has been heading up Enough is Enough. And, you know, enough is enough, but it's never enough for online predators and those who would like to make money off your children online. And, you know, these are some of the things that Enough is Enough has done. They've led advocacy efforts to pass groundbreaking bipartisan federal laws. They've developed an Internet Safety Program 101 and an Emmy-winning PBS series. They've launched the National Safe Wi-Fi campaign, resulting in McDonald's and Starbucks filtering illegal contents on their public Wi-Fi. And they've also led the Children's Internet Safety Presidential Pledge, which we'll talk about in a minute, and a governor's pledge and attorney general pledge. So these are pledges to do what they can to keep children safe. And Donna, we were talking about kids who maybe they see that this is a problem. They're online too much. How do you help them?
Yeah, that's the struggle I think that a lot of parents are having right now, because as soon as a parent tries to limit a smartphone use or internet time, there often a war will break out between that child and the parent. So let me just talk about prevention for a minute. There's a big movement right now, not just in America, but around the world. If you have not introduced your child to a smartphone yet, please consider not doing it if they're under or below the 8th grade level. There are so many safe phones right now that will let the child do all kinds of great things, but not actually be internet connected, and will also allow them to be able to communicate with you, the parent, or anybody that you, the parent, decides that they can communicate with. So, but if you've already got a kid that's got a phone or they've got a gaming device, and of course that most of them probably by the time they're in school will have some type of internet-enabled device for schoolwork, limiting time is just important, and you just have to do that as a parent, you know, determine how much time they're going to have for homework, and that homework comes first, and then how much time they have for play online and to communicate. And the great news is you can set up those kinds of rules and guidelines with your child, but you've got technology tools, parents, that you can turn on. And we highly recommend that for every internet-enabled device that you let your kids use, whether it's a smartphone, a gaming device, a laptop, whatever, that you turn on the parental control tools and you set time limits. And you can do that for each child, because time limits for an older child might be broader than they would be for a younger kid, and that you can filter unwanted material like pornography. You can monitor outgoing and incoming communication. And so this is really important, and all the different platforms, as well as gaming devices and the Android and the Apple phone, they have these controls, so you can just go to them and look at how to turn them on. So that's really, really important. So use the tool so that you don't have to keep knocking on the door, which, by the way, I think it's a really good idea not to have the technology in the child's room. Just as a good starting point.
Leave your phone somewhere else. And, you know, that's the same. Yes. Jonathan Haidt has recommended that in the schools, just leaving the phone somewhere, not even bringing it into the classroom.
And there's that movement there. So states across the country, many of them have either limited screen time and phone use inside the classroom or banned it altogether, which we think is a great idea, Penna, because teachers need to be able to have the attention of their students so they can teach them and not have them scrolling to death on their social media site. However, guess who the biggest complainers of those laws have been?
Who?
Parents.
Because they want to stay in touch with their kids. They think that's the safe way to operate.
Yes. So what we're doing, and we've put out a smartphone guide so that parents can see these other smartphones that their kids can use. They're not technically smartphones. They're not like the Apple and the Android, but they're phones like Bark, like Trumi, and Gab. They all have these great phones that I mentioned earlier in the earlier segment. So look at those phones. You can still stay in touch with your kids. They can stay in touch with you, parents, but they don't have to be internet-connected phones.
Wow. Well, we were talking a little bit about Congress and doing things about this just legislatively. And I noticed, actually, I posted this article. I think you wrote it, the $11 billion reason why big tech won't protect our children. We had something called the Kids Online Safety Act, and everybody thought that was going to pass and be signed into law, and it hasn't happened yet. How come?
Yes, that we actually did think it would get signed in December of 24, and it was not, to the disappointment of all of us working on it, including the senators who launched that over on the Senate side, which was Democrat Blumenthal and Republican Blackburn.
Marsha Blackburn, of course.
Marsha Blackburn. So we're hoping that that's going to get reintroduced this year. There was some backlash. Now, I talked to people on the House side, including the Speaker's office. They did have some concerns about it that made some sense to me. So part of getting good laws passed is the House and the Senate need to get together, and so if there are legitimate concerns of how can you strengthen a law to get it better, then we need to do that before it gets passed. So I think that's probably what's going to happen here when it gets reintroduced. It has not been reintroduced yet that I know of.
So you've been, I think you may live in the state of Virginia, but if you don't or you do, the state of Virginia has been kind of a model state on this, hasn't it?
Well, yes. The state of Virginia, the state of Florida, the state of Utah has really been the lead. The states are doing so much because I think that they're like, golly, the federal government takes so long, so we're just going to do states, state passed laws, which we all like, right? Because we're Republican, we want to see that happen. So this is good. And for instance, there's age verification technology that has passed out of many states. And what is that? These are laws that have been passed that actually require websites, like pornography websites, to require age verification that the person coming to their site is indeed an adult, someone over the age of 18, which, of course, is a great idea. We have those laws. We have age verification in the physical world, and the first piece of legislation, Enough is Enough, helped to get passed in '94, was actually an age verification law. It was struck down by the Supreme Court. So now Texas really led the way on this, and that case was heard by the Supreme Court. We have not had a decision yet, but we're hoping and praying that they uphold the Texas law, because it's a good, solid law. Many other states have a similar law. So if the Supreme Court upholds that, then guess what? Pornhub is leaving these states. They've already left a lot of these states. They're like, well, if you're going to, check to see if somebody's an adult, we're just going to shut down. And we're like, good riddance. Bye.
Right. Well, so, yes, I know that our Attorney General Ken Paxton argued this case before the U.S. Supreme Court back earlier in the year. And the age verification is part of the solution, but that is not part of this Kids Online Safety Act. Is that because it's so cumbersome for some states they don't want to do it?
No, the age verification is a different type of a law, Penna. So the Kids Online Safety Act is a law that is actually dealing with apps like, social media apps and gaming services and platforms. And what this law requires these companies to do is to be more proactive in a lot of different ways, to make their controls more visible, and to do some default filtering and that kind of thing. So that's not an age verification law. That's more of that's dealing with a different set of problems as opposed to age verification like the Texas law, the one we were just talking about. That is specifically targeting pornography websites and requiring them to age verify before they let somebody come onto their site and see all of their millions of free videos and images that anybody can see, including a child.
So what is the $11 billion reason big tech won't protect our children? That's your article.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, what's the reason? I think that there are multiple reasons. Number one, we know that these companies are making advertising dollars off of kids. So there is a price per head, if you will, for kids being on these sites. The other is that, unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons, the internet has really been kind of open.
Let me leave it there for a second because we've got a break. But yeah, the internet has been left open, and it's hard to close it sometimes. Well, Donna Rice Hughes is going to continue this discussion with me. I'm having a good time talking with her, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View, my final segment with Donna Rice Hughes. And Donna, I noticed during that case that Texas argued at the Supreme Court, one of the pieces of information was through smartphones, children have instantaneous access to unlimited amounts of adult hardcore porn. 53% of children have a smartphone by age 11. You don't recommend that, I know. But I guess, it is very open. The internet is just a kind of a cesspool. I mean, there's a lot of good that can be accomplished, online, and we're never going to go back from that. But it's a huge problem, and I think I'm so glad that you exist to solve it. But, it's just the problems keep morphing and coming back, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And it is open, and that's really the way the Internet was set up, because the few tech companies that were in existence in the 90s just fought against any regulation, and they said, you'll kill the Internet if you try to regulate it. And we're like, we kind of kill the Internet.
We went with that a little bit, though. Didn't we kind of go with that for a while?
Well, no, we didn't. In terms of Congress didn't, and groups like us did not.
Okay.
We said, no, you have got to apply the same types of protections in this digital world that you have in the physical world. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos. And so we helped to get these laws in place, and they were all passed. All right, the majority of them got struck down in the 90s at the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court didn't really understand what was going on, and neither did some of us, trying to write the laws at the time with this new technology. So, but the point is now that we know what we're doing. We know how to appropriately regulate these companies, to regulate criminals. And let me just say something about criminals. Last year, 2 years ago, the largest amount of child porn or child sexual abuse material was ever reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's over 105 million images of kids being exploited as young as infants and toddlers. And DOJ doesn't even have the resources to go after a lot of that. So this is really just how severe this is. You also asked Penna before we took a break, what's the $11 billion reason? There was the Harvard report that I mentioned earlier revealed that 6 major social media platforms collectively made $11 billion from U.S. users under the age of 18.
Wow.
So that's so like I said, there's money. So the focus right now, there's a lot of focuses. One is enforcing the laws against the criminals. Okay, so we've got a lot of those laws on the books. They need to be funded. The other piece of this is, where do we fill the loopholes, like age verification technology, which is really calling these pornographers to put age verification in place, which just makes sense, right? You can't, a kid can't go buy a Hustler magazine, right? But an adult can, right? So we need those kinds of laws in place. And the other is these companies that have really gotten away with a lot at the expense and on the backs of these kids. They need to be held accountable and responsible.
Yes, they do. They do need to have some sort of an enforcement provision, and they need to be punished for what they're doing.
That's right. And I used to say in the beginning, I was saying that, at the beginning, the first 10 years or so of doing this, that technology is neutral. But that's no longer the case, because now we know, and the data supports it, as do the whistleblowers, that these big tech companies have actually built their algorithms to keep kids hooked and to keep us hooked as adults. Okay, so they're spending a lot of money to do this. So that's another big problem. So we really just need a good, fat paradigm shift. And I think we can get there, because it's become such a public health issue. I mean, even the Surgeon General under President Biden issued a declaration that social media was a huge public health issue with respect to the safety and the mental health of kids. And that's just the fact. We know that. So this happened with big tobacco. It finally, things started to click when the Surgeon General said, wait a minute, there is harm to smoking. We know that there are harms online. Just even using the technology and too much screen time is a harm, and it's increasing depression and anxiety. And that's not even dealing with, the bad guys hurting our kids and trafficking them and abusing them and exploiting them.
Donna, I noticed something on your website that you have had, I guess, in place for a while. And this is a pledge by attorneys general and presidents about internet safety. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we back in 2015, President Trump was running for the first time against Hillary Clinton. We said, you know what? We've got a chance to really change the landscape before the next president comes into office. Let's get them to pledge to prioritize protecting kids. So we wrote the first Internet Safety Presidential Pledge. and President Trump signed it. Hillary Clinton supported it after Trump signed it. And so, so that really kind of kicked this whole thing off. And so we did it again in just this past election, and we know that President Trump, we were told that he thought that he loved it. I didn't get a signed signature, but he's already off and running to deal with these things as he did in his first term.
What about the Bondi Justice Department? What about Pam Bondi?
Well, yes, I'm hoping to meet with her this trip. In fact, I'm on my way from South Carolina to Virginia right now.
Oh, good.
And she does care about this issue, and we believe that she's really going to, do some, cleaning of house on getting the DOJ in order, and in particular with respect to the current laws on the books. So we've got to get those laws enforced and funded, and we're really hoping that President Trump will consider setting up and putting some things in place that we have recommended, including some executive orders. He can do so much, and we've already seen what he's done with executive orders, right? I mean, he just outlawed paper straws. Good for him. I hate paper straws. But there's a lot we can do here to protect kids, and he's got the momentum with him to do that. So we've got these recommendations in front of him, and we're hoping that we can get some things done, including potentially setting up a children's internet safety director or someone to advise the White House on these issues to pull it all together.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And, along with all the other things he's doing, it seems like it would be right up his alley. I guess the last thing I want to ask you is just to give some encouragement to parents who have to navigate all of this. How can you encourage them? I know you've said don't get them the normal Apple Android smartphone when they're young. Get them the flip phone or whatever, these other phones that are out there. Do that. But what else? What can parents do?
Well, the first thing is I just want to encourage parents. I know you're feeling overwhelmed even just hearing me talk. You're probably going, oh, my God, what am I going to do? So just know we're here to help. Please go to InternetSafety101.org. Sign up for our free newsletter. We're keeping you up to speed on all these things all the time, all right? Everything's free. We also, at that website, we break down every risk that kids can encounter online, and we show you how to recognize those, what the red flags are, the warning signs. We give you conversation starters. We've got guides to guide you, and we've got a whole prevention section so that you know how to deal with the tools that are available to you. We have internet safety contracts. We really just have everything. So we try to make it easy. I am not going to say easy, okay? Being a digital parent is not easy.
It's not easy, but you're providing everything we need.
We're doing our best to provide everything that you need, and so we'd really love to help you, and we're here for you, and everything's for free. So please visit us at InternetSafety101.org and sign up for my podcast.
Okay,
well, getting a lot of good information.
Donna, thank you so much for joining me.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you. Now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
going through the stations and caught Kirby and a very interesting topic. So just listening to it, and so just by hearing the topic, I can relate to some of those topics. But it has impacted my life a lot. I enjoy listening to the station.
I appreciate Point of View. You've been great and wonderful. A lot of information, and I really appreciate all your work you do.
My wife and I have listened to Point of View for about 17 years now. We just want you to know how much you have meant to us in our lives. I've gotten a real education since I've started listening to Point of View.
I want you to think, what would we do? How ignorant would we be if we didn't have Point of View? And come on, guys, give something to Point of View to make sure we don't lose this wonderful voice. And thanks again for what you do.
Thank you, Kirby. I consider this my school time, so my 2 hours of school each day. So thank you very much.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for sticking with us for the second hour of Point of View. And a little bit later in the program, I am going to open up the phones at 800-351-1212, because I think some of you may have some questions about the issue we are going to discuss. And in January of this year, President Trump signed an executive order declaring that it is national policy that we will establish a missile defense shield. A lot of people don't realize that we don't have that. I think we're going to learn in today's interview that President Trump's concept for an Iron Dome for America, a la Israel, but much bigger, of course, for the United States, is not a new dream of his, but it is a well-fleshed-out technology that we need to implement for our country's national security to protect our population. And they've changed the name from the Iron Dome to the Golden Dome. That will be the United States technology, at least at this point. And this technology should and could have been implemented during the Reagan administration. Our guest, who is Ambassador Hank Cooper, he was instrumental in this effort. He's going to join us in the next segment. He was instrumental in this effort under Ronald Reagan, and he believes that we must protect America against ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hypersonic missiles with space-based interceptors. He was an Air Force officer who, after diligently working in this effort during the Reagan administration, became director of the Strategic Defense Initiative. Some of you have heard of it, SDI, under President George H.W. Bush. He continues to engage in this topic because we really do need a system for missile defense. He was designated Ambassador to Defense and Space while serving as Deputy United States Negotiator for Defense Arms and Arms Reduction in Geneva during the Reagan administration. The Reagan administration gave him the title of Ambassador for that. And so I have so many questions for him. And if you have questions, I'll open up the phones for you to do that. But one thing that's happened on that front already, of course, we've just finished the first 100 days of the Trump administration. And what I'm seeing now is that he's going to turn much more to foreign policy in the second 100 days. So maybe one of the things will be this missile defense system, Golden Dome. I've posted an article from Defense Scoop up at pointofview.net, and there is a reconciliation bill out there that Congress is looking at, considering, and they've got to pass. It's a $150 billion bill. It includes funding to support development and fielding of the Golden Dome technologies. These are space-based sensors and interceptors. Republican leaders of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees released this legislation over the weekend, and it includes nearly $25 billion of funding to begin work for President Trump's Golden Dome initiative. So it's moving. There's movement. So the House Armed Services Chairman, Mike Rogers of Alabama, and the Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, they say that that we would get quite a boost with this. And, this amount of money, it actually doesn't sound like that much. And that's the point. It's really not that expensive to deploy these space-based interceptors. This is about building the future of American defense. This is what Roger Wicker, a Senate Armed Service Committee chairman, says. It's about building the future of American defense, achieving peace through strength, and ultimately deterring war. But it's $24.7 billion, dollars to help kick off this massive project if the legislation is approved. So if the House bill of $150 billion is approved, inside that is $25 billion for the Golden Dome. The vision for the effort was introduced via an executive order signed by President Trump in January, and it looks to field a multi-layered homeland defense architecture able to defeat a range of missile threats, and it's an historic investment. America's deterrence, says Mike Rogers, who's head of the House Armed Services Committee, quoting him, America's deterrence is failing, and without a generational investment in our national defense, we will lose the ability to defeat our adversaries. With this bill, and he's talking about the entire $150 billion bill, we have the opportunity to get back on track and restore our national security and global leadership. The markup for this bill was yesterday, for the reconciliation bill. It happened yesterday. So this is moving, and so that's the news peg. That's why it's important to talk about this system. And there's a couple of articles that I've posted. Well, I posted the one with Defense Scoop. I guess that's the only one I posted. But there are other ones out there that you can find. One is how President Trump can deploy a missile shield for America in just 3 years. I think that's what I'm going to major on with Hank Cooper when he joins me. There's a system, and it was called Brilliant Pebbles back in the Reagan years. That's what they called it. And it's really satellites out in space, and they're interceptors, and they can stop rockets from hitting, especially if it's done early in the process, if these missiles are detected early on and they're stopped early. Hank Cooper says, if resurrected by President Donald Trump's Great Gold Dome initiative and supported by Congress, the system could rapidly and quite affordably quickly begin deployment in space. And here's the kicker. He says, especially if Elon Musk helps by applying his well-known technical and business expertise. And of course, he's got his Starlink system. And he says that, Hank Cooper says that contrary to numerous so-called experts over the years that have claimed that developing and building modern space-based interceptor systems would require many years and be excessively expensive, that's not true. These people are uninformed, but he's afraid that they may dominate. And there's going to be a pushback from the quote-unquote bureaucracy to this Gold Dome initiative. So we have to be ready for it. And that's why I wanted to discuss this topic today. So, Brilliant Pebbles, this program that was, you may have, if you're my age, you heard of it before, back during the Reagan years and the George H.W. Bush years. And unfortunately, it was the bureaucracy that really stopped it back then. And there was kind of a military slowdown and pushback, even from the Air Force. So that's why Hank Cooper would like to see this done by private companies in conjunction with the government, but not controlled by the federal government, because, again, you can be much more efficient if you go private. So I'm just very excited to talk with this gentleman who has been in this fight for literally decades, and he's still in it. Hank Cooper, PhD engineer. We'll talk with him after this. We hope you'll stick with us for more Point of View. And if you want to call us, 800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
A new book by David Zwig, An Abundance of Caution, confirms what many of us knew as we tried to navigate the government mandates during the pandemic and lockdowns. Some have referred to him as a data-minded journalist, author, and cultural commentator who isn't all that political, but has been challenging the authoritarian restrictions we all tried to endure 5 years ago. The 464-page, 1.5-pound book may be more than you might want to read, so you might want to dip into an excerpt published in The Atlantic. The premise is easy to understand. We made a huge mistake with the school shutdowns. As early as February 2020, we knew that children were never a significant transmitter of the virus and also knew that the virus posed little danger to them. Here is his explanation. He says without sufficient acknowledgement of the harms of school closures or adequate planning for unwinding this intervention, officials showed that their decisions to close were simply reactive rather than carefully considered. The decision makers set a radical project in motion with no plan on how to stop it. In effect, officials steered the car off the road, threw a cinder block on the accelerator, then jumped out of the vehicle with passengers still in the back. No one was in front or even knew how to unstick the pedal. In his post on X, he argues that the book is not about the pandemic, it's about the failure of the expert class. It turns out that the expert class isn't so expert after all. Teachers' unions promoted hysteria about the alleged dangers of opening schools. Health officials and school boards rarely challenged the push for school closing. And his book is a cautionary tale about what happens when we believe so-called experts and ignore relevant data. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter, and I have set the stage in the last segment about the idea that there's $25 billion in the reconciliation bill to fund the Golden Dome Missile Defense Shield. And I've explained also that this is not a new idea. It's something that actually should have been implemented in an earlier iteration decades ago, really in the Reagan administration. And we're going to talk with someone who has been involved in the effort to get space-based missile defense since the Reagan administration. And he is Ambassador Henry F. Cooper. He was a Clemson engineering graduate with a PhD from NYU. He served in the U.S. Air Force. He was science advisor to the Air Force Weapons Lab. He was Deputy Assistant Air Force Secretary for Strategic and Space Systems. He was also Assistant Director for Strategic Systems of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency. And he was a negotiator for defense and space systems under President Reagan. This negotiation, of course, took place with the Soviet Union. And then he was President George H.W. Bush's Strategic Defense Initiative Director. And then he's also worked in the private sector, and he is now chairman of the High Frontier and also of Applied Research Associates. Ambassador Cooper, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, I'm pleased to be with you. I'm a little beyond those last positions, though.
Those last two. Okay.
Right. I'm 88 and just pleased to be here.
I'm pleased you're here, and I'm so glad that you're still remaining engaged in this issue because it's actually an opportune moment. And, so I think we should just go to the basics first. Why do we need a missile defense system, and why does it need to be space-based?
Well, I think we need, Reagan had it right, that it's foolishness not to protect ourselves against the weapons that are most dangerous, which can be launched from far, far away and carry nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction to wreak havoc. So we need defenses for protection, and I believe if they're done right, they also aid in deterring a major conflict in any case. So, and we are largely defenseless. We haven't done the right things over the years. Reagan's had the right ideas, and Donald Trump is providing us an opportunity, if we can remember the basics, to actually implement what Reagan's ideas were. And that's what I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about and trying to encourage the current powers that be to accomplish.
So when we think of a nuclear threat, a lot of times right now we're thinking of Iran as sort of top of mind because we want to try to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon. But there are actually three very well-established threats, aren't there?
Well, I worry that Iran potentially also could have nuclear weapons, not lots of them, but they joined in the testing 20 years ago with North Korea, the underground testing of their nuclear weapons, and I'm sure everybody knows that North Korea has that capability today. But both Iran and North Korea have launched satellites that could be carrying or could be used to carry nuclear weapons, and they approach us from the south and launched over the South Pole. And our defenses, such as they were originally deployed only to protect us against missiles launched over the northern pole. And so we have a site in Alaska and some on the west coast. And we now have at sea and also in some ground locations, sea-based defenses, so-called Aegis missile defense, which are sea-based and ground-based. So we're not completely defenseless, but it's relatively easy to overwhelm it. And both China and Russia now have major capabilities. North Korea is undeniable in its capability. And as I say, I worry about Iran. We're trying to keep them from getting a serious nuclear capability, but and the problem is that they have had cyclotrons running for a long, long time there, and I'm not sure our intelligence is fully aware of what they've done.
So, Ambassador, we have some ground-based defense. We have some sea-based. Why would a space-based system be more comprehensive and better?
Well, if you're in space, you're in orbit around the Earth, and if the system is deployed in sufficient numbers, you can deal with an attack from anywhere, beginning while even the missiles are rising. And if done right, before they can launch the weapons themselves and shoot them down before they arrive over the United States. So being in space is the most opportune place to be. We've known this. This is not a new idea. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency 60 years ago did a major study. It's called Project Defender, if anybody wants to look it up. And their conclusion was that the best way to do the job would be from space. It's just that we didn't have the technology then, and we actually didn't have it through the Reagan years. We were developing it, but because of the political obstacles that we ran into on my watch in particular, and then subsequently when the Clinton administration came in, they killed the SDI program entirely. Now Trump is opening the door again to have those same capabilities evaluated, and I believe the right thing to be done is what we knew how to do 30 years ago, and I worry that we're going to reinvent the wheel at great expense when we don't need to do that if we go back to the future, so to speak, and exploit the ideas that existed 30 years ago.
So we have knowledge, we have technology, and we've had that, but the will was lacking, and I understand that there was a lot of pushback from various bureaucracies, wasn't there?
Yes, there were, and including inside of the U.S. government that got in the way. So, and you use the right term. It's bureaucracy that is the issue. It's not the technology, and it's not the leadership in the technical areas necessarily, but the institutional bureaucratic interests get in the way of doing the right thing, and that overlaying with the congressional world, which supplies the funding and the interest of protecting constituents' interests, makes the problem very complicated to be dealt with. It was that way on my watch. It was that way when even we started key programs. And for example, the United States Navy programs, I was fortunate enough to have a colleague, J.D. Williams, a 3-star admiral who was in charge of naval warfare at the time in the Pentagon, and he understood and got with me on it, but all the other admirals in the Pentagon essentially opposed the idea. They met in concert with Frank Kelso, who was Chief of Naval Operations for an extended period, but most admirals didn't want to begin such a program because they were afraid that they would be tethered, so to speak, and be given duty to protect land areas rather than fleet operations, which the Navy considered it to be its main interest. But in any case, we were able to persuade the powers that be to begin the programs, and a young man who had that idea came to work with me at SCI, and we began those programs, which in my judgment provide the best global defense capability that we have today. We have
let me jump in, Ambassador, because we've got a break. I do want to allow a listener, if you have a question for the ambassador about this issue, just a question, not a comment. 800-351-12 is the number, 800-351-1212. My guest is Ambassador Hank Cooper. We're talking about some serious business here, but something that is realistic and can be accomplished, something that we need to protect our citizens here in the United States of America. It's actually been a long time coming. Will the Trump administration be the forum and the opportunity for us to actually do the right thing? We will continue to discuss this right after this message.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And my guest, Ambassador Hank Cooper. And some people stay in the fight a long time, and he has stayed in the fight for a space-based missile defense system for a long time, decades. And Ambassador Cooper, how'd you get interested and involved in this issue in the first place?
Well, I've been interested in space since I was still sort of a kid. I got interested in a firm way when the Soviets launched Sputnik, if anybody remembers what that was.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first space satellite system. And we went into a mode of trying to play catch up. And then John Kennedy, of course, the next major thing that happened was that he challenged people when he was president that we would go to the moon by the end of the decade. That was in the 60s. And we made it, of course. John Glenn orbited the Earth, and then the first, I forget what year it was, at the first landing on the moon.
1968.
68. So, and I watched all of that and up close and personal. And then I actually was commissioned in the Air Force, as you said, and went to graduate school and got involved in protecting our strategic systems, including our space systems, against all manner of nuclear weapons effects. And we learned with the high altitude testing that all of the systems we had in that period of time were vulnerable to something called electromagnetic pulse. We expected electromagnetic effects, but in 1982, I forget exactly, 62 or something like that, the starfish prime experiment, if you look it up, in the South Pacific, that demonstrated, 1962 it was, that all of our space systems were vulnerable. The time at Bell Labs, I was working on Telstar, which was our very first telecommunications satellite, rudimentary by today's standards. The first signal was broadcast from just outside of Paris by way of humongous large antenna, 100-ton antenna, to one in Rumford, Maine as well. And my wife, Bobby, and I went in to watch that very first broadcast. It was Star Spangled Banner and the flag. And and then I worked on Telstar, as I said, and we lost it very shortly because of this test in the South Pacific. We lost essentially all of our satellites at the time due to trapped radiation and the electromagnetic effects. And so all of our strategic systems were quite vulnerable to those effects. Our ballistic missiles and whether based in land or at sea, and our strategic aircraft, the bombers, and the command and control aircraft, and the communication systems by which the president and the military could manage those systems were all quite vulnerable to
well,
those
in a
effects.
sense, aren't we vulnerable now with so much dependence?
I hope they're not. We learned how to keep them from being vulnerable. It took quite a period, but we went through an enormously important period in the 60s and early 70s, which we hardened our systems. But we didn't do anything to harden, the electric power grid, for example, that supports the American people. And so the grid, upon which the electricity to support hospitals and water plants and water and sewer plants and all of the security and police and everything we depend on. If we lost that because of a high altitude EMP attack, and it's quite plausible that we could, then most Americans would actually die from starvation and disease, because we no longer produce our own food in this country. We import it from various sundry places, and without the electricity, all of that would stall. And so, even in World War II, we had victory gardens, and everybody had their own means they looked after for protecting themselves and providing food for their families. And we lived on wells and so on. That's not true anymore. And so it would be a disaster. And we could lose it without any explosion in this country if high altitude nuclear explosions over the United States shut down our power grid.
Wow. So
some places have taken care to deal with this. I believe the United Kingdom has, and some of the European nations have, but we continue to ignore this really important problem in this country.
Oh, my goodness. Well, do you think that President Trump is enough of a disruptor to actually push through and push forward space-based defense? You think he can do it?
He's enough of a disruptor to get it started. And I don't know exactly what's been appropriated or will be appropriated, but more than enough money has been already designated to be appropriated to build the space system that we need. On the other hand, I don't know how it's going to be spent, because we don't have a management structure in place manned with the right people to deal with it. And I'm worried, quite frankly, about all the talk about a Manhattan Project and so on. Every time we did something truly innovative in this country, it was by a small team led by really competent technical leadership and the senior leadership that oversaw the project and made sure that they were free to follow their technical insight. I mean, most people have forgotten it now, but we built the first ICBM in about 4 years, and it was done because a young brigadier general, I believe at the time, Benny Shriver, he got all the young PhDs he could, and this was after World War II, and we had lots of young guys in the Air Force, and he hired a separate group out on the West Coast. He left the people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base which was in Ohio, which was where most of the R&D in the Air Force had been for aircraft and so on. And he went to the West Coast, and within a little over 4 years, I believe, we had actually began deploying our first ballistic missile systems. And then the same thing was true with Hyman Rickover, who did the same thing with the submarines. He didn't use the institutional Navy processes. He started what now is called Rickover Tech, I think. I have a grandson that went through it and began the nuclear Navy. And we had never launched a missile from a submarine when he got it started. And within 4.5 years, we had the first submarine, I forget, was it called the Nautilus? I forget now, at sea. And so today, when you look at what we're doing, and they're talking about, 20 years or whatever in order to build capabilities, it's nonsense. If we're really serious, we would get a team of really competent people, put it together, and protect them from the bureaucratic interests that I've already mentioned.
You know whereof you speak because you've seen things derailed, and the Air Force bureaucracy you mentioned pushed back on space-based defense. You had something called Brilliant Pebbles, which I'm going to need you to explain, but it came out of the private sector, didn't it?
Well, it came from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory and a small group there, and really key people again. Lowell Wood was the manager of the small task force to put it together, and Edward Teller, most people know who he was. He was the basic inventor of the hydrogen bomb, and he didn't pay attention to what they were doing in the Manhattan Project because he was already worrying about what was to come after the atomic bomb. Well, anyway, he got the idea. He visited me in Geneva when I was negotiating with the Soviet Union and invited me out to Livermore to look at what they were doing. And I left there to go down to Los Angeles to the people who actually were in charge of the Air Force for doing the space part. And I couldn't.
Okay, I asked you a question, and then here's the break again. So we will continue on that note. Ambassador Cooper is my guest, and we will be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm thrilled to have Ambassador Hank Cooper with me, and he had a role in the Reagan administration's strategic arms control negotiations. And Reagan, Hank, supported SDI, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, he originated in a speech, and at the time said that it might be into the next century, which we are now in, of course, before we had the capability, but he wanted to begin to study the problem, to conduct the research and so on, so that the American people could be protected against missile attack. And that was the origin. It was called the Strategic Defense Initiative, and Teddy Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, called it Star Wars, and that was a label that was of derision that was associated with it, and it was to indicate that it was a pipe dream. It was just like the movie and didn't make any sense, and that stuck and was a problem both while we were negotiating with the Soviets and even when we were when I was running the SDI program, it was still that way. And in fact, Les Aspin, who chaired the Armed Services Committee, when he became the Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration, said he was taking the stars out of Star Wars, and he killed all the space-based research and development and even testing that stage that we had, experimental work that we were already conducting. So, we've had this bureaucratic disconnect between people who think that you can get your enemies to be nice, and they want to do arms control, and they still do, many of them, in space now in particular, rather than to build the systems that we need to protect the American people. That protection comes out of handshakes and negotiations rather than peace through strength, which, as you know, was Reagan's mantra through his watch, and I think the correct one.
I think President Trump has used the term.
I think that's correct. I think he does too. So he's got 3 years and 9 months yet to go, and whatever it is, and we'll see how far he can get. He's moving at a faster pace than we were able to under the Bush administration along the way. Where I was in the discussion, I couldn't even get the Air Force to go up and look at what Livermore was doing, and they were doing it with technology that they could buy off the shelf in the private sector.
Wow.
And the Air Force believed you had to invent everything from scratch. We have a similar situation right now. Elon Musk, as most people know, has sort of been wiping NASA and the Air Force off the map with the modern version of technology that we demonstrated 30 years ago in the SDI program. You've seen missiles take off and land, and then be relaunched. We did the same thing 30 years ago. Well, it was more like 25 years ago. Small rockets and that sort of thing. It was the early stage of Elon's work. I forget what he called it, grasshopper, I think, at the stage before he got to where he is now.
Do you think he would get involved in some kind of a plan for a Golden Dome?
I hope so. I certainly hope so. There have been reports that SpaceX is one of the contenders for at least a major portion of what is in the program. And if it does, and Elon tends to watch everything, you're not going to get him to focus on a single issue, but he will make sure that if his people are involved, that we're using cutting edge technology out of the private sector, because that's where it is. It isn't in the government laboratories. It wasn't on my watch. We fired the Air Force. Actually, George Monahan actually deliberately fired them and put together a task force with whom I've written the director, a good friend of mine, was a task force when I ran the program as well, that reported directly to him as the the director of the SDI program, and fired the Air Force and actually cut back all of their programs and diverted the funds into the best technology that could be produced. But of course, that was killed in the beginning of the Clinton administration. So I mean, it's a cycle that has to be overlaid with the best technology that can be done. And if Elon is somehow involved in the same way that he's been involved with his Doge activities on his own programs, and I can't imagine he wouldn't be, then I'll feel a lot more comfortable about what will come out. I expect we'll waste a lot of money in any case. You may not know what entropy is, but that's a technical term for wasted energy that you can't recover. And the issue is, how do you minimize it? You can't avoid creating some, and people make mistakes. And we have to have the good sense and the management skills, as I've told some people, to pick up the pieces and go again, and because the technology there is there to do this job affordably. And there will be arguments about how expensive it's going to be, and we've got to get organized, and build a team, and da-da-da-da-da. Well, you need
to do it. You need to do it quickly. I read just a wonderful piece by Angelica Sorotin, and she interviewed you, and she really chronicled your whole story, which I thought was wonderful. But you told her that business minds in our government, exist right now, and that we need young innovators. And then we also need someone to lead them, some kind of a shepherd. And also, I thought this concept, and I want you to unpack it a bit. We've got about 2 minutes. That the president and the secretary of defense need to be totally on the same page about this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the metaphor I used there was when Dick Cheney asked me, and George Herbert Walker Bush was on board with this, to lead the SDI program after I had critically reviewed at their request what we were doing and what we were doing in arms control and what we should be subsequently doing. And I was well aware of the bureaucratic problems. And so I asked Secretary Cheney, I told him, yes, I'd be delighted to do that, but only if I worked directly for him. And he agreed to it with the president's backing. And so that meant when the bureaucracy tried to stymie me, I could go directly to him and raise the issues and get a hearing, and he never decided against me. And there were some high-level people we overruled, but once we had done that a couple of times, then I didn't have problems after that with the bureaucracy. I believe the same thing is needed today.
Yeah.
Whoever he puts in charge of the Global Dome ought to be selected on the basis of his competence technically, and he ought to have the backing of the Secretary of Defense and the President. And by backing, I mean if he needs the help, he goes to them and expects to get it.
Hank, thank you so much for explaining this. I think that it's giving me optimism that we'll actually be able to pull this off. I would just have to say that you're a national treasure because you've stayed in the fight and you're still weighing in on it, and I hope you continue to do so. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back on Friday for our weekend edition, and tomorrow we've got a guest host.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.